Good evening, everyone. My name is Cindy Eisenhower. I'm a 40-something white woman with curly grayish blonde hair sitting in a guest bedroom in my house with a glass of wine. It has been a long week, as you all know, and it's after 5. I am also the current president of the Society for Economic Anthropology. I want to thank you all very much for joining us tonight for an incredibly important conversation. The murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor earlier this year catalyzed a call to examine and address racism and racialized violence in all of its forms. Many sections of the AAA offered statements in support of BLM and other contemporary mobilizations against racism. While anthropology has certainly contributed to anti-racist education, many of the section's statements recognized that racism marks our past and continues to reverberate in the present through our curricula, through our institutions, and through our disciplinary practices. As the ABA's statement made clear, at this stage, disciplinary soul searching must be replaced by clear strategies and paths forward. Tonight's roundtable event will feature and build upon a series of discussions among coalitions of section presidents held over the past few months. Together, we've identified 4 key strategies for active anti-racist praxis that I'll ask the coordinating section presidents to summarize tonight. They include, first, efforts related to inclusive and decolonized syllabi, as well as citational justice. Second, efforts related to improving representation and recruitment and retention among our membership and our leadership. Third, efforts related to mentoring and supporting students. Fourth, efforts to build alliances and to contribute to anti-racist activism and action within and outside of our societies. We hope to leave 15 minutes at the end of this session to open the floor for questions, but also for discussion and for your input. We invite your constructive ideas about how the sections might work together to move the needle on active anti-racist praxis. So please do stick around for the end and contribute to the discussion. Tonight, Rishay Barnes, president of the Association for Black Anthropologists, is going to start us off, reiterating the ABA's powerful call to action. Rishay.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Cindy, for introducing me and our project, which I find to be quite important, especially in this particular moment in our political economy, for lack of a better word. I am Rishay Barnes, and I am the president of the Association of Black Anthropologists. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a Black woman who visually presents as a Black woman. I am a descendant of enslaved African people in the Southern United States on both sides of my family. I'm talking with everyone from Western Massachusetts and specifically Deerfield, where we occupy the lands of the Pocumtuck Natives and live in a home where the inhabitants owned African people. Lucy Terry Prince, who was brought to Deerfield when she was about 5 or 6, is reported to have lived on my street. I am wearing a red blouse, Black earrings, and Black glasses. I want to thank again Cindy for organizing all of us to participate in this conversation. I also want to thank my auntie for agreeing to host it as part of the program chair's agenda. And thank you to the AAA for providing this platform and at a reduced rate as well, which was one of the anti-racist intersectional issues we all raised when we began planning this iteration of the AAA meetings as a virtual conference that more people could be a part of if it were made accessible in many more ways. I also want to thank the Association of Black Anthropologists, in particular my executive leadership team, who worked together with me to address the issues most important to our members. We are both an organization that works as anthropologists within and without the Academy, with a focus on Black experiences worldwide, as well as a community of scholars who provide resources, mentorship, and support within a discipline that has long seen and treated us as the other, and still wrestles with what to do when the natives talk back. As many have stated at this point in the program, and if not stated, are definitely feeling, I knew we would be meeting the week of the election when the AAA set these dates. I knew I would be feeling the impact no matter the outcome. At the time, I did not anticipate this limbo experience of not knowing and not planning to know for multiple days, maybe even weeks or months. I'm saddened at this fact because it means the presidential election was much closer than I hoped and wished for. A friend and colleague pondered out loud, can we subscribe to Black pessimism and hope simultaneously? Someone else responded, hope is the wrong word, it does not hold enough. I teach from the Black feminist anthropology framework coined by Irma McLaurin, but practiced throughout the history of Black folks living in community and telling their own stories. Today, in my class of 15, there were expressions of confusion, fear, vulnerability, anger, sadness, curiosity, guidance, and resolve. We took about 30 minutes of class time for them to articulate these feelings and thoughts. It was a lot of time in a class that only meets for 1 hour and 45 minutes, twice a week, but speaks to some of the issues we want to address as it pertains to anti-racism and issues concerning equity. The section presidents engaged in this conversation today began discussions about putting together a panel for these meetings this summer, as many of us were addressing the continued police violence and anti-Black racism taking place this summer amid the increased impact of the coronavirus on Black communities. And I have to say that my family was affected by the coronavirus as both my parents tested positive over the summer. And both are well as can be expected at this point, but my mom continues to be on blood thinners, which we've since found is one of the side effects or one of the results, I don't know the best word, continued issues that go along with COVID-19. My colleagues on the executive board of the Association of Black Anthropologists and I, most specifically President-elect Bertine Lewis, crafted the statement and highlighted key issues. We named the intersectional experiences of the Black people targeted: Black men, Black women, queer Black, Black trans. We highlighted the disproportionate impact of COVID-19. We restated what we'd said previously over and over again, that Black people continue to be targets of the ongoing atrocities of the criminal policing system and the accumulated health effects of racism in this country. But we also made a point of calling our discipline, the discipline of anthropology, to account. And I will share this portion of the statement here. We urge our non-Black anthropology colleagues, especially our white colleagues who tend to reproduce the toxic effects of whiteness in anthropology departments, think tanks, research groups, and other spaces where anthropology is practiced across the nation, to move beyond the soul-searching despondency and white guilt that this moment and similar other moments has engendered. And I would say even tonight, as we're thinking about the election and the results of the election, we may find ourselves repeating some of that behavior. Instead, we want members of the discipline to start at home, to accept the ways that anthropology has been and continues to be implicated in the project of white supremacy, both in its implicit and explicit manifestations, and to lay out a clear path for moving forward. We want members of the discipline of anthropology to see the ways that white supremacy is manifest in their curricula, syllabi, graduate student recruitment, mentoring, hiring, and promotion activities. We want them to see and correct their refusal or inability to teach race, racism, the pathology of whiteness, and the banality of white supremacy, their marginalization of Black scholars, and their scholarship. We also challenge them to evaluate their commitment to being, paraphrasing the words of Black anthropologist William S. Willis, a discipline of the subjugated races. This call to recognition and action is only the first step in the discipline's long journey towards decolonization. I encourage you to visit the ABA's website to read the statement in its entirety. The website is aba.americananthro.org. The section presidents engaged in this conversation tonight decided that since most were majority white, they would do the work of organizing themselves to address these issues. The group decided that the issues were these and met together with other section presidents and those who were interested in tackling these issues pre-conference to come up with solutions or progress or ideas. I have some ideas as well, and I hope people will engage them also. For the category of citational justice and inclusive decolonized syllabi, I direct everyone's attention to A. Lynn Bowles' article, which she lays out beautifully in the recirculated current issue of Transforming Anthropology with a commentary by Erica Williams, the question of who do you cite and what journals do you read to make that determination? Additionally, what and who are you really teaching your students? For the question of representation, recruitment, and retention, or the directive of representation, recruitment, and retention, I encourage everyone to read Ira Harrison and Faye Harrison's Pioneers in African American Anthropology and the second generation of African American anthropologists, edited by Ira Harrison, Deborah Johnson, and Erica Williams, which repeatedly articulates how difficult it has been for the discipline of anthropology to have representation of Black, Indigenous, and Latinx people, not only in their departments, but to attain tenure and dare to reach full or named professorships. And I must include and highlight the experiences of Indigenous people. And then what happens to their work once they are emeritus? For the directive of mentoring and supporting students, my own essay a few years ago in Anthro News, in which I asked the question, anthropology is for us, right? Asked us to consider not only what we teach, but how we teach it. What frameworks do we situate as valuable for our students? Do we collaborate with students of color equally? See them as potential co-authors? In what ways do you sponsor their careers? We know sponsorship happens, but who does it happen for? And for the directive of alliances for anti-racist activism and action, I say this, there has been a lot of conversation about alliances, activism, and action. How are you defining racism? If your definition isn't broad enough, your actions likely are not anti-racist. And what about anti-Black racism in particular? In what ways do you perpetuate bias along the lines of color, language, pedigree? If you are not from a marginalized or underrepresented group, you have to ask yourself how you determine who to align yourself with and on what issues. I am simultaneously pessimistic and hopeful, knowing that both are incomplete. And if hope is appropriate, it is for this conversation and others like it. But with my colleagues in the ABA, I ask that we move past conversations, or at least build upon them, and the ones that have been had previously. And so to close, I return to the ABA statement to ask that we all join together to demand that local city and state governments engage in meaningful dialogue, which involves humbly listening to the protesters and taking their demands seriously. We also encourage all anthropologists to donate to bail funds to free protesters, to continue to circulate information rooted in decolonized ethical research, to support movements for reparations for Black folks globally. And we encourage Black people to protect their health, emotional, mental, physical, and spiritual as we continue in this struggle. And we continue to ask for and demand that white folks allow us that space to protect our health. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rishay. I appreciate that very much. Okay, so let's move to each one of our four action priorities. The first one, it will be led by Jessica Greenberg, who is a co-editor of Polar, representing APLA, and Ian Allison, who is the president of the Society for Cultural Anthropology. Thank you too.
So I'm going to go first. My name is Ann Allison, she, her, hers. I'm a white woman. I have gray hair and red framed glasses. And I'm president of Society for Cultural Anthropology. We're looking at scholarly praxis, those norms and practices that undergird production and reproduction of knowledge in our field. The standards used to constitute, judge, and disseminate scholarship in our discipline, and that index, as Kathy Lutz put this in her critique of gender bias, in citational practices in anthropology in 1994, who and what count as anthropologically relevant. as put by a task force that reviewed tenure and promotion standards regarding public scholarship for the AAA and posted guidelines in 2017. Much of the scholarship follows established norms, which center on disciplinary and academic impact, and assume the greatest impact is achieved by publishing peer-reviewed journal articles, monographs, and chapters in edited volumes. But not only is there a gap, as it notes, in that more and more scholarship these days defy these boundaries, but these standards themselves are deeply embedded in power inequities that get transferred and reproduced in practice. Lynn Bowles, as Riché mentioned, has spoken of this in terms of symbolic capital, how citation capital transforms not only into respect, recognition, and prominence, but also into real capital in the form of higher salaries and merit pay. As she and multiple others have noted, there's an ecology of scholarly practice in our field, starting in undergraduate classroom, graduate programs, syllabi, the fetish of solo authored monographs published by university presses, and solo authored peer-reviewed journal articles, tenure track versus contingent positions, promotion trajectories, and climbing the ranks of seniority. This is transacted through a currency of scholarly standards and evaluation that privilege and reward certain bodies, such as contingencies and trajectories, which is riddled in what Christian Smith, founder of the Cite Black Women's Collective, has called misogynoir, the ways that citational policies intersect with other forms of oppression, such as white supremacy, imperialism, that erase Black women's scholarship. So this is what we see our work as aimed to do, to uncover, interrogate, and dismantle the biases and inequities of scholarly practice in our field. How to do this? We concentrate here mainly on two procedures, citation and canon. And by situating both of these within a larger ecology of knowledge reproduction, I mentioned three, and then Jessica has a couple others she's going to mention. One, decanonizing the canon. Many are proposing ways to address what Ryan Jobson calls the provincialization of the classical anthropology canon, to diversify, democratize, and defang it of its hegemonic forefathers. One we find to be particularly suggestive is the Decanonizing Anthropology Syllabus project done by a collective of anthropology grad students as their final project of a graduate social theory class in the Applied Anthropology program at Oregon State University, aiming to challenge the Eurocentricity of anthropological thought by exploring influential, though historically ignored voices. It offers 10 substitutes for the so-called classical canon, and it can be found on the website for Footnotes blog. 2, we suggest alternative metrics for tenure and promotion. Encourage departments as well as universities to rethink reliance on conventional standards for tenure and promotion, and also to be made aware of inherent biases and various evaluative techniques, including citation, impact value, peer review, rankings of journals and presses, and productive output. There is considerable research now available, mainly from other disciplines and fields, on inequities in all of the above, such as on the unreliability of citation counts, the problem with such rubrics as Web of Science and Google Scholar, and discrimination affecting the review process, from racially biased citation patterns in philosophy, sociology, and communications to bias against women in psychology. We refer you to Paula Chakrabarty et al. Hashtag communication so white, as to be particularly illustrative in this regard. We suggest that you advocate for bias literacy to be done in departments or at the University Promotion and Tenure Committee. And instead of the convention of one book by academic press, consider valuing other forms of productivity, outreach, and public engagement. Learn about alternative metrics, such as altmetrics, search out your librarians. Librarians tend to be an incredibly useful resource in this regard. And for the third thing, we suggest that in academic journals, you include a statement to prospective authors and reviewers on how your society or journal values and expects diversification of citational practice. SCA just did this a couple months ago, and it seems to be incredibly productive already. Jessica?
Thank you so much. My name is Jessica Greenberg, she, her, and hers. I'm a white woman. I've got glasses and curly hair, wearing a black sweater. I just wanted to say a quick thank you to the organizers, and also really to thank Riche and the ABA for a call to action that I think represents, I'm sure, many, many, many years of labor and struggle and organizing. And I just think we can't emphasize enough an acknowledgement of the labor that goes into this, and also the organizing piece, right? And I think we're academics, which means often many of us are not also organizers. And I think what this ABA calls for is a shift to thinking strategically as organizers, with all of the sort of humility and all of the kind of pragmatic orientation that goes along with this. I only have really a minute, and I don't want to take more time. So I'm just going to say a couple of things, and I can return to them in question and answer. I think we can't underestimate at all the extent to which what this call means is an entire retooling of the disciplinary relationship to knowledge production, which I think is incredibly exciting and incredibly important and long overdue. And I think the role of journals and journal editors in that process is really important, particularly if we begin to democratize questions of citation and genre and knowledge production. I think the role that journals can provide is to be spaces for another stage of collective pedagogy in a Freirean sense, conversation and experimentation in what citation is and the work it does. But this also requires a huge amount of labor from editors and editorial boards. And I would propose we're better served thinking about editorial practice as a collective endeavor, opening up conversations and sharing that labor as editors across journals, making use of collective spaces, workshops, and in short, citational justice is the goal, but the process is really where our organizing will happen. And for this, I think we really need to be talking and working with each other on a practical basis. That's the end of my timer. I have some specific examples I can return to, but I really don't want to take other folks' time. So I'll just end there with a call for collaboration.
Super. Thank you so much, Jessica. Okay, our second strategy is on representation, recruitment, and retention. I worked on this with Rebecca Luster with the Society for Psychological Anthro, but Rebecca is going to present what we came up with.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca Luster. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm speaking to you from St. Louis, Missouri, which I respectfully acknowledge is located on the traditional ancestral lands of the Osage Nation. I'm a white woman with brown curly hair and blue eyes, wearing a bright blue button-down shirt, and I am president of the Society for Psychological Anthropology. So first, thank you to Cindy for organizing all of this, and to all the other section presidents. And a special thank you to Riche for starting us off this evening and for all your work. Cindy and I were looking at the issue of representation, recruitment, and retention of people of color, and we were specifically focusing on these issues within our sections within the AAA. Certainly this is a much larger issue that merits much deeper discussion and analysis, but we were really focused on how this showed up within our organization of the AAA. And some of the problems that emerge, many sections reported to us that their membership is overwhelmingly white, and that they have had significant difficulties recruiting and retaining members of color. But interestingly, getting a handle on the true scope of this problem has proved somewhat difficult. When I approached the AAA about getting information about the demographics of my section, the SPA, I was told that while I could get demographic data for the AAA as a whole, they were not able to provide this information by section. And I'm not entirely sure why that would be the case, but it seems that that would be something of a barrier to strategic planning around these issues. In any event, it's clear that most sections appear to be or actually are disproportionately white, leading, of course, many individuals of color to report feeling marginalized and unwelcome. This has a negative trickle-down effect. Students of color report that they, too, are less likely to want to join a community where they don't feel represented or where they would not be welcome. So this is obviously a critical issue for the health of our discipline and contributes to this ongoing siloing of perspectives and voices that should in fact be amplified. We asked the section presidents to share with us some of the best practices that they have developed in addressing the problem of representation, recruitment, and retention. And there were a number of different initiatives going on within the sections regarding students. The AES, SPA, and a number of different sections have developed diversity travel grants in order to support students of color in attending and presenting at AAA and section conferences. Many also have travel funds for graduate students or paper prize awards, ways of subsidizing their travel and accommodations at the meetings. And some sections have been working to develop ties with colleagues at HBCUs as a way of creating a better pipeline for students. As far as section leadership, this was a concern for many sections, and a number of sections noted deliberate efforts to nominate more diverse slates for the board. For board seats and other kinds of leadership positions, some sections have considered designating a diversity seat in order to ensure this diversity, but this strategy, of course, carries some significant risks in practice. It means that people of color can end up being pitted against each other for what is construed as limited access to leadership, and it can have a cooling effect on other kinds of nominations for leadership positions. So this is not really a strategy that we recommend. As far as intellectual climate, this was a major concern for most sections in terms of how to really overhaul and completely revamp the way that our intellectual climates function. And a number of sections are involved in things like, as Anne and Jessica were just talking about, citational justice and other kinds of decolonizing efforts that you'll hear about today. The SPA is currently developing a series of webinars on this issue. It's also the theme of our upcoming biennial. So these are small steps, but they're taking us somewhat in the right direction, but there's a lot more work to do. We were asked to reflect upon the outstanding challenges or questions that still need to be addressed, and there are many. Overall, as I said, sections are aware of the need to take a hard look at the intellectual and interpersonal cultures of our organizations and to make major adjustments. And this panel is a part of the initial steps of that effort. But these interventions, of course, need to go beyond simply an intellectual commitment to diversity or a question of numbers. They need to be significant and sustained, especially when they disrupt a section's business as usual. This is an indicator that we are doing something that might actually bring about some significant change. Some sections reported that being close-knit sections with long-standing relationships can tend toward unintentional cliquishness, which exacerbates feelings of exclusion, of course, for new or potential members. So finding ways of opening up these networks is critical to shifting subfield cultures. And Anne and Jessica gave us some suggestions for how to do that in terms of our citational practices, but we need to continue to develop more strategies for how to do this on an everyday interpersonal level. And becoming more welcoming of critical scholarship that might destabilize our traditional canons. This is a process that's complicated by an ever-tightening job market and imperatives to demonstrate the mastery of mainstream intellectual approaches. So we've got some contravening pressures at work there. Other remaining challenges, as that sections noted, were fundamentally, how do we get scholars of color to come, join, and stay as we're working to build better representation? How can we invite people to become involved without them feeling tokenized? How can we invite people into positions of leadership while being mindful of the fact that many scholars of color are already significantly overburdened? And fundamentally, the question remains of how we can create physical and intellectual spaces that are genuinely open to and welcoming of all who wish to participate, not just out of good intent, but in actual practice. And right now, it seems that sections are still really struggling to figure out some of the best ways to do this. Thank you. Cindy, I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add to that.
Nope, I'm going to move right on. We are running out of time very quickly. So I want to move right on to our next strategy on mentoring and supporting students, co-organized by Jim Igo with Anthropology and Environment and Jackie Soloway with American Ethnographic Society.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Igo. I'm 50-something white man with glasses and long overdue for a haircut. brown sweater with dark windows behind me. I'm the president of Anthropology and the Environment and the chair of the Department of Anthropology at the University of Virginia. I'm speaking to you from Charlottesville, Virginia, which is the occupied territory of the Monacan people. University of Virginia is, of course, the first public university in the United States built by enslaved laborers. And in our more recent history, we're still in the wake of the white supremacist terrorist attacks of August 11th and 12th, 2017. I spoke with Jackie. Jackie and I spoke and agreed I would start off by sort of just outlining the problem that we're addressing, and I'll try and keep it quick. So the problem is really to do with the way the academy and anthropology in particular socializes graduate students towards individualism, elitism, hierarchy, competition, exclusionary cliquishness, and the valorization of related ways of talking, writing, knowing, being, and seeing, which is learned in classrooms, conferences, publications, and in the kinds of mentoring students receive in preparing for the job market. And of course, this is these processes are fundamentally gendered and racialized around white supremacist male values and perspectives. The piece that I find most useful for thinking about this in terms of its succinctness and really naming problems in very actionable ways is the article Anthropology as White Public Space that was co-authored by Karen Brodkin, Sandra Morgan, and Janice Hutchinson in 2011 in American Anthropologists, and is based on a survey of many anthropology faculty of color working in anthropology departments, especially around the United States. And I won't go into it much, but the two things they named that I think are really important for us is the ways in which anthropology departments, and I would extend that to sections in the professional and the AAAs, is operating on race avoidant discourses and patterns of institutional behavior that nevertheless index race and promote racially unequal outcomes. So that's one part. And the other part, which they mentioned towards the end, is how what happens to you in graduate school and the kinds of support and mentoring you have coming out of graduate school very much shapes the opportunities and possibilities that you're going to be able to experience and pursue throughout your career. And I would say for, that's important for sections, right? Because sections are these spaces in which there's possibilities of mentoring beyond particular departments that can reach out to people who haven't maybe had they talk about a lot of scholars starting out their careers in isolation of not having a good network of people to rely on. And, you know, this in anthropology and the environment, when I came in, there was a strong ethic of mentoring, which was begun by the people who founded it. And it's something that's been established and carried through mostly by women in leadership positions in that section. But I would say that for me and many others, the important thing about anthropology and the environment, and I think it's a challenge for sections, is how you become a space that provides mentoring that's different from those things I described, right? That's an alternative to them, that's based on relationships that are not hierarchical, that are sustained and ongoing, that speak to all the different things that panelists have talked about before in terms of how to approach a career, how to build networks that are supportive, how to value different kinds of knowledge. And the statement that came out of our task force working document, which was collaboratively crafted, is how can we best continue the work of creating an A&E community that not only studies and celebrates difference, but is also home to difference in terms of people, especially BIPOC scholars and perspectives, including abolitionist ecologies and knowledge sovereignty. And I bet I used more than my allotted 3 minutes already. So I'll stop and invite Jackie to talk about actual initiatives that sections are undertaking, our sections, and what are some possible ways forward.
Right. So thanks, Jim. I'm Jacqueline Solway. I'm based in Canada, a professor at Trent University. I am president of the American Ethnological Society. I'm a white woman with kind of brownish hair and red glasses and a blue striped shirt. And I'm she, her, or hers. So I'm going to talk more about actual practices that sections, and I suppose particularly AES, because I know it well, and we've really thought hard and worked hard to promote mentoring and to be inclusive, not only in terms of what we conventionally think of as diversity, but also diverse in terms of forms of expression, in terms of forms of publication, in terms of the kinds of activities that we promote and sponsor. So I think, and I also would want to frame this, I'll try to be quick, Cindy, frame this. I found our last meeting between us extremely helpful because of Jeff's suggestion that I think of mentoring in terms of repair, to use Deborah Thomas's term, in terms of not so much affirmative action, which can have distorted results, as we've learned, or consequences, but as a deep historical recognition and thinking, it's a slow process. So instead of seeing our almost all sections have grants for students to travel to conferences, and many are proactive in trying to ensure that they go to BIPOC students and others, and students or junior scholars of historically underrepresented groups. So I would include disabled and so on in this larger category of historically underrepresented. So so I like to think of it as repair, as work we really need to do. I think we have to provide opportunities for people, and we have to let, people are not going to be able, BIPOC and marginalized peoples are not going to be able to do the work unless they're provided the opportunity. And that means encouraging reading, encouraging students to be interns, giving them grants to travel to conferences, noting our conference content, providing lunches, and social engagements for all kinds of networking outside of the normal hierarchical networking that Jim was talking about, that usually graduate students are socialized with. So I think we have to provide opportunities. I know we all have mentoring practices. Let me just mention a few, because I'm of that AES has. We, including the Journal, have worked hard to promote an anti-racist agenda through our mentoring and practice. We have lots of student research grants, and if all things being equal, well, no, all things are never equal, but we're proactive on providing grants to diverse scholars, also to scholars at public institutions or graduate students. There are many other things. I also would like to mention, I think our board is diverse, and that has helped us, because I don't know how many of you are familiar with the latest issue, well, not the latest, the summer issue of American Ethnologists, which is on Ferguson. It was based on the meetings that happened last spring in St. Louis on the occasion of the 5th anniversary of the Ferguson Uprising and Black Lives Matter. Well, we had a scholar who organized it, who's part of the local community, and was able to attract a really interesting range of participants, artists, activists, environmental activists, and trans activists, And this all eventually went into a journal, which we've broken a lot of ground. And there was a session, I don't know if any of you attended it at 2:45 today on on Ferguson, on Smashing Racism, where we had poets, we had artists, we had filmmakers. And I want to say for people who, I think the sections also have to be careful if they want to broaden the canon, if they want to include knowledge production from other unconventional fields. Often you're working with marginalized people who you need to compensate. You know, these people often provide a lot of free labor. I think I will just, so that's enough on mentoring in practice. I've gone on for a while. I think I can't emphasize as we move into our last part about discussion of outstanding challenges and questions, the importance that Jim brought out, and I think others have, of not being token, you know, of not making scholars and activists who come within our rubric, who work with us, feel like they're being brought in just because they do something different or they look different than your conventional white academic. And that's a lot of work and it takes a lot of thinking. And I think I'll
Thank
stop.
you, Jackie.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Cindy.
Okay, so we have our fourth and final strategy on alliances in anti-racist activism with Paul Stubbs from the Association of the Anthropology of Policy and Jeff Makovsky from SUNTA.
Hi everyone, I'm going to present. I'm Paul Stubbs. I'm white. I use he, him. I'm a bald older man wearing a red t-shirt and speaking to you from Zagreb, where it's just coming up to 1 o'clock in the morning. In the 6 minutes, I'm going to present Jeff and I's take on the section president's discussion that we had on alliance building and activism. And I'm really going to make 3 broad points. The first is to really acknowledge and build on anthropology's history of anti-racist practice. There's a long history of participation by anthropologists in decolonial, anti-racist and other protest movements and uprisings. And we need to learn from examples of success and failure. In addition, whilst the niche of engaged or activist anthropology has generated important work, there's a danger that it becomes normalized, and that's counterproductive. It's more about the career of individual anthropologists than contentious politics involving oppressed groups. We encourage collective and institutional efforts. We also encourage ongoing and robust public conversations about anthropology's history through conferences, panels, scholarly work, and the dissemination of those histories of sections whose formation was linked with broader social justice struggles. Also, it's important, many anthropologists have risked their professional careers to get involved with anti-racist causes. Reception of this kind of work is highly uneven across professional associations, sections, departments, and programs. Although some activist stances may be popular within the discipline, others are not. And those working outside centers of power, where the majority of Black, Indigenous people and people of color scholars work, may receive less support and face a different set of challenges. Secondly, we think we need to address the range of professional challenges that an anti-racist activist stance entails, working towards broader professional acceptance of these stances for those working inside and outside of the academy. Inside, and people have already talked about this, changes in hiring and promotion practices to recognize and reward activist positionings. Senior faculty have responsibility for creating safe and welcoming spaces for those junior colleagues and students engaged in anti-racist activism. Promotion and tenure track guidelines must give more weight to advocacy and activist activities and support those activities through grants, reduced teaching, and so on. Time spent on activist activities should be credited. The precaritization of the academic workforce must be addressed. Adjunct and other non-permanent positions are more vulnerable to institutional retribution for taking a stand on anti-racism. Thinking globally, there's really a need to be aware of the risks that some scholars take through their anti-racist activism. Supporting scholars at risk in particular countries is necessary, but not sufficient. Sometimes they provide precarious labor. Journals should make sure there is not just space for work on activism, but should work to break down the boundaries between activism and academia. Outside the academy, practicing anthropologists have a different set of calculations. They face issues such as corporate control, so do those in the academy. Non-profit advocacy rules and precarity may constrain alliance building and activist activities. And the third one is the need to overcome some of the political and institutional challenges of taking an anti-racist activist stance. We may need to distinguish between tactical alliances that may be short-term and single issue oriented, and strategic alliances that aim to be longer term and more all-encompassing. Both have their place, but the modes of operation, the principles and ethics on which they are based may be different. Collective action can and should be supported both within and across institutions and sections. We may have a role in our sections to play here in terms of gathering examples, providing support and networking opportunities. We need to shore up durable political processes in terms of anti-racist praxis. Insurgent action is necessary, but so are institutionalizing and politicizing anti-racist goals at the level of strategy. The AES work on Ferguson that's been mentioned is a good example here. We face post-democratic politics and anthropological involvement in activism could be susceptible to depoliticization and technocratization. How might anthropologists engage in forms of anti-racist political struggle that are overtly and durably agonistic? We shouldn't be seeking consensus, and we shouldn't be assuming that everyone is on the same page. I've nearly finished. The extension of authoritarian and illiberal forms of rule across the world is something to contend with as we ensure that anti-racist alliances become transnational in character. And anti-racist struggles may take different forms across the global South and indeed the global East, from where I am speaking. And that needs a flexibility and a sensitivity to different knowledge flows and translations. And finally, we need a much wider and more creative use of community engagement grants and support for those who are involved in community engagement. 6.5 minutes, so I almost cut it to 6, Cindy. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Paul, and Jeff too. Okay, and that brings us, we've gone over the 4 strategies that we've discussed in our previous meetings. Now we've asked Maria Cruz Torres with ALA to give us some closing remarks in response to what she's heard, and also some of her ideas for how we can move the needle forward.
Thank you so much, and welcome and good afternoon. My name is Maria L. Cruz Torres. I identify as Afro-Puerto Rican, and I use the pronouns she and her. I'm wearing purple glasses and the blue and white jacket, and I'm in my daughter's room right now, a very colorful room here in Arizona, the central land of many native people here. And it is like right now here is 5:05 p.m. And also ALA's president. I want to thank Cindy Eisenhower and for organizing actually this panel and for her efforts. And also I would like to thank Riche Warnes for kind of the introduction and kind of starting us and also with this conversation, but also kind of introducing the section. Because we don't have that much time, I would like to concentrate. I mean, I think this is a big effort, and I applaud the effort of these sections in kind of addressing, anti-racism issues and how we can move forward and how we can make, for example, anthropology a discipline that is more inclusive and also more diverse. But given the constraint of times that we have today, and also because I think there are people in the audience who have questions and would like to participate, I would like to kind of concentrate on two of those strategies that were discussed and that were addressed by the panels, the presenters in here. One of them is the mentoring, and I think this is really important. I think this is one of the areas that we in ALA have been working for a while now, having a mentoring program that we run on a yearly basis to kind of provide, the mentorship that many graduate students and also junior faculty need within the association. Our program, for example, we do pair, and this is actually run by a graduate student. We do have a graduate student representative. This is our main job. And the idea is to pair graduate students and or maybe sometimes junior faculty with senior faculty. And the idea is that maybe they're working on a common issue, and it is lasts throughout the year as well too. But I'm also thinking more about the broader mentoring, not just the one that takes within the AAA, but the kind of mentoring that we do at universities too. And I think this is a main concern too, because I think what happens sometimes is that I think in general, I think we need to kind of put a little more effort sometimes in mentoring, but also having more faculty of color also mentoring students of color as well too, because I think this is an issue, something that I hear from students also, that they need more mentoring sometimes from faculty of color, because there are some things that they can have in common, maybe the same trajectory, maybe the same struggles in academia. So this is really, really key as well too. And I think also the whole idea that you're suggesting having, for example, more travel and more award for graduate students. I think this is also that is very important. And I think this is also ALA has been doing for a while now too. We do have a graduate student paper award. So it is an opportunity also for students to kind of present the research and a paper and get recognition also that will help them also in the future when they're applying for jobs as well too. So I think these are all strategies I think that we can all use to kind of pay more attention to the mentoring that we do within the association, but also kind of the mentoring that we do within our universities. I think we really had to kind of look also at the struggles that many of the students of color and students, they have to go through, and also understand that struggle too. For example, sometimes students, and this is something that we hear a lot in ALA too, students don't have, for example, the funding to attend the anthropology meetings. Junior faculty sometimes don't have the funding either to attend faculty junior anthropology meetings because the university sometimes doesn't cover the travels as well too. So I think these are kind of things that we could do maybe to improve, and maybe having more, mentoring kind of the next generation of anthropologists. But I think also the whole idea is also giving, within our departments, how do we create spaces that are safe for those students and where we can give them support, the kind of support they need to succeed in academia. Okay, because I think many of the students of color are first generation, they're the first one in the families of getting a PhD, especially in anthropology, and we need to pay attention to that too, okay? So the second, we're running out of time too. So the second strategy that I want to kind of talk a little bit here is about how can we increase the diversity or change kind of the demographics within our sections. I think this is a very key issue too. And, I think what you're doing right now, actually, this is a very good example of the kind of collaboration that we can develop and we can create among all the different sections. I think this is important, having this collaboration too. But I think also that we really, again, we need to go back to our schools, to our universities, our departments, and see what spaces are there. Why, for example, there are no a faculty of color in some of the departments? What happened? What are the hiring plans? How can we make sure that departments actually are compromised, and they do really, and institutions also, to hire more faculty of color, for example, in some of the anthropology departments? as you know, as a matter of fact, actually, most of the anthropologists of color, many of us are outside of anthropology departments. We are not in anthropology departments. Okay, so you have to wonder, you have to question yourself, why is that? What is that happening? Why, for example, many new that I know at least Latino Latinx students are now applying to other departments that are not necessarily anthropology departments. Why is that? Again, I want to point out what Jackie said at the end, that people should not be hired to be tokens. That's not the purpose. I think there should be some really institutional support. There should be a commitment from institutions, from departments to hire and support people of color, faculty of color, and to make sure they are successful within academia. And that's how I want to end up, because we only have 4 minutes left. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, everyone, for being here. We didn't leave as much time at the end for discussion as I'd hoped, but Jeff Martin with the AAA tells me that we can have all transition over to one of the, I don't know quite what to call it, Jeff, the virtual hallways to continue the discussion. And I believe he's going to post a chat, a link in the chat that you can all just click on to go there. I think we just have a few more minutes before we'll be automatically cut off. So Jeff, do you recommend that we go ahead and go there now so that we're not kind of midstream before people lose the link?
You have 3 or 4 minutes if you want to do a question or.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So we have several questions in the queue, and you can see that some of them have been voted up and down. And I did want to ask Akil if he's around to raise this question. Are you there?
Yes, yes, I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so my question was about, how to go beyond volunteering names and to get a more diverse leadership on all of the sections. And this is also, of course, a big question for us in the general leadership of the AAA and the executive board and other the other main committees. What is the best mechanism by which we can ensure that the commitment to diversity and inclusion is in fact reproduced by itself? So in other words, it doesn't require, in a way, for people to be hyper alert or whatever to do it, because that's not sustainable. It won't happen if you just depend on people to out of good intentions to make it happen. So that was my broad question. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on it. We could do it in the virtual hallway.
Anybody want to take that one? So thinking about how we can kind of institutionalize these and ensure that they actually happen. Nobody? Well, it's clear that that's a very good question, and we need to think more about it, I think. Maybe that's the best answer, is how can we really make sure that this sticks? Jim?
Yeah, so the part I was thinking about, and I'm sorry if I missed something additional, was the question of leadership in the sections, because that's a key point that came up in our conversations, was basically that we're pretty good at mentoring, and yet our leadership is predominantly white and has been all along. And so in addition to making A&E a space, or part, not in addition to, part of, right? Making A&E a space that is home to different kinds of people with different values and ideas, needs to be reflected in our leadership structure. And I do think there's a ton of work to be done just in terms of like relationship building, around get people getting to know one another across sections, so we can prioritize the questions and conversations that Rashe's put in the chat, but also to develop relations and welcome people towards being in the section and mentoring people towards being in leadership roles.
Super. Okay, so I think that we do need to move to the virtual hallway. So I'd like to invite anyone who'd like to join us. We have been sent a copy of the questions as well to click on the link now in the chat room. Thank you everyone for coming, and thanks to all the panelists. I really appreciate everyone's contribution to this important conversation, and let's make a difference. Good night, everybody.
Still doesn't work. Okay.